You're watching Capitol View, Sunday morning talk focused on the political scene in Arkansas.
Well, the Arkansas governor's race will be one of the marquee matchups in this year's election cycle. Republican Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Libertarian Ricky Dale Harrington, and Democrat Chris Jones are all vying for your vote. Chris Jones joins me now for a conversation. Good to see you again.
Good to see you also.
Thank you for being here. And happy birthday.
Thank you.
Yes.
It's my wife's birthday also.
And happy birthday to your wife as well. It's quite a present for you to get to answer questions for me in a hot seat for your
right,
birthday.
I'm a little nervous, but that's okay.
No, you're good. I want to hit a lot of policy today, so this will probably be the last interview you and I get to have before Election Day, so we'll see. Education, you've talked about pre-K investment, you've talked about teacher pay raises, you've talked about community college investments. Do you have a price tag for how much you think some of these things are going to cost? Because I can do the math on those, and it's hundreds of millions of dollars.
I don't, because here's the question. I do have a price tag on us not making those investments. When you think about an investment in pre-K, we know that kids that go to pre-K are more likely to read by third grade. And if you're reading by third grade, you're less likely to go to prison. We know that if there are opportunities for trade schools to really train the future workforce, that attracts new businesses. So the cost of not doing it is super high. Now we have numbers, but I'm not prepared today to give you an exact price tag. And the reality of it is, the legislature is the one who holds the purse strings. So it has to be a dialogue and a conversation with the legislature. Yeah,
get them in a headlock and get them where you want them there. We read in the paper this past week, Arkansas ACT scores on the decline at a 30-year low. Quite frankly, they've been falling for years. What would you do to reverse that?
Well, first of all, again, investment in education. We're not paying our teachers. Teachers in Arkansas make less than teachers in Mississippi. And so we have to invest in attracting teachers that'll provide our students with the kind of quality of education that they deserve and need. And the other part of it is we're not working with communities and with schools together. The ACT, I've taken it. It's not necessarily the easiest test in the world to take. But
what was your ACT score?
I'm not telling my score. Probably lower than yours.
Maybe, who knows? I think I was a 30-year.
But here's the reality though. Without a focused and intentional and deliberate effort to actually solve the problem, we're going to continue to spiral down. And that doesn't just apply to increasing ACT scores. It applies to a large variety of issues and problems that we face. When we gloss over them or only talking points and don't really unpack the root cause of the problem, we can't ever solve it.
What's the root cause of the problem?
Well, it's varied, right? Think about ACT, students are not prepared. If you're not, we have in some areas, including my own hometown, where somewhere between 8 and 9 out of 10 kids are not reading at grade level. If you can't read at grade level, you can't pass the ACT. You can't score high enough. We're not preparing them for the basics. And that starts early. That's why you start with pre-K, to lay a strong and solid foundation that then prepares you to be ready to take that test when the time comes.
Let's talk about public safety, huge issue in this campaign, huge issue all over the state right now. You and I have established that you have problems with the death penalty. You're giving thought to how you would probably pursue that if you were elected governor. But one of the things that I think has been driving the crime problem in Arkansas is the release of parolees. They're letting them out early under the Emergency Powers Act. Would you reverse that if you were governor? How would you address that early parolee release situation?
So I think the issue of safety is also multifaceted. I will look into it. I don't have an answer whether to reverse it or not at this time, because far too often we knee-jerk reaction to certain things like that. The reality is safety is multifaceted again, and I go back to my agenda is spreading PB&J across the state. PB&J is preschool, broadband, and jobs. When we have higher quality education for all, when we have real economic development spread throughout in all areas across the state, that's when we all have an opportunity to do jobs and to have better education and to really attract new businesses, which then reduces crime. And what we need to do is make sure that folks are not committing minor crimes so that we can make space in our prison systems for the real violent crimes that are happening.
Your opponent this week released a plan, light on specifics, that talked about how she would address public safety. I'm talking about Sarah Huckabee Sanders here. One of the things in there is increasing prison capacity. You're talking about that. Are you willing to spend $100 million for a new prison or $200 million for two prisons? Is that a budget priority for you?
Well, look, first of all, it's not necessarily a plan. The bullet points is what it really is. And second of all, I question whether or not she actually had a conversation with her own father on this. Because her father came out and said, we need to invest in education, economic development, and not increasing prisons. Because that reduces the pipeline going in, and we invest in programs that will decrease the recidivism rate, because that reduces the need for prison beds. Now, I think we need to make the investments there to make sure that we then have space for those violent criminals.
But so you're opposed to building a new prison at this point in time?
Well, no, I'm not opposed to building a new prison. I mean, I think there are short-term fixes and there are long-term fixes. You know, part of this is how are we having the conversation with communities and really talking about what does community safety look like in the county, in the municipality, in the region, and what are the needs there. So I'm not going to take anything off the table in terms of addressing the needs. However, my question and concern is, are we really solving it by getting at the root cause, or are we increasing prison beds? Look, we have one of the highest incarceration rates in the country, and if not the world. So we're locking people up. And is it really solving the problem? The answer is no, because we still have crime.
Well, don't you think you have to do both, though?
I think you do have to do both.
Yes.
That's what I said, there's a short term and long term.
Well, we're not keeping them in the prisons right now, though. We're turning them loose because of overcrowding right now. So it seems to me that there is a need to put another prison in circulation.
Again, I'm not taking it off the table.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that we have to, you don't just build new prisons. Because think about highways. If you add another lane in the highway, you think it's going to solve the problem, and all of a sudden 2 months later, you still have congestion. So the question is, how do you solve the underlying problem?
Spoken like an engineer there. Yeah, last week I had Attorney General Attorney General nominee Tim Griffin on the show, and we talked about truth in sentencing. We talked about not letting parolees out early, forcing them to serve longer sentences. I think he said the federal level is 85%. He supported that. Do you support longer sentences being served on some of these violent criminals, or do you think that the way we're letting them out now on parole is acceptable?
I think it has to be a case-by-case basis. You know, there's no situation that is exactly like another situation. And I am a Christian. I'm an ordained minister, and I believe in repentance. I believe in an opportunity for somebody to turn the corner, and you don't know in each case, in each situation.
Let's talk about health. Healthcare is going to be another big area where you'll, if you're elected governor, you'll deal with. Let's talk about the Medicaid expansion. Do you support keeping it in place?
Yes.
All right. What are you going to do when you get pushback from the legislature on that?
I mean, look, that's the sausage, right? You know, we think about politics and the executive branch and the legislative branch as if they're supposed to be in lockstep the whole time. Our country was built on the idea of that tension. That's why we have 3 equal branches. That tension is important. So you sit down and you have a conversation about how do we address the underlying problem. We need to provide health care to all our Kansans. I think about my mom. She had a stroke in Little Rock. We were able to get her to the hospital in 5 minutes. If she had been in her hometown of Stevens, she might not have made it. And when hospitals losing $10 to $100 million a year annually, and they're closing already, we have many hospitals that are at risk of closing in the next 5 or 6 months. You know, I had a conversation with all the state agencies, you know, and plus. So when I had the conversation with the Department of Health, Department of Human Services, we talked about what it was like to actually solve the underlying problem. And these are the important conversations to have.
You've had conversations with the different state agency directors?
I've met with all the secretaries of each of the 15 agencies and the senior leadership. And we went over the budget, we went over their strategic plans, we went over the challenges and the opportunities that exist in the horizon. Why do that? Because I think it's important for the next governor to be ready to lead on day one. There are really critical issues. Think about the Public Service Commission. As soon as that governor hits the seat, they're going to have to be ready to appoint a new public service commissioner. That has major implications on the energy industry and the utility industry in this state.
I want to ask one more question before we take a commercial break here that stays on this topic of health. Teen birth rates, we got new statistics this week that also show that Arkansas is #1 in teen birth rates. How do you reverse that trend?
So as the father of a 13-year-old and as a father of 3 daughters, statistics like that concern me deeply. You know, I still go back to spreading PB&J. The higher, we ensure that we have high quality education, we ensure we have economic opportunities, and we ensure that there are things to do out of school other than just finding a corner somewhere, then that really reduces the chance for those increased teen pregnancies. Now, having said that, there's no silver bullet. Again, I'll keep repeating this over and over again. What we haven't done in the last decade or so, if not longer, was really bring all parties together around the table and say, how do we understand what the core root problem is, and what's the solution, and then having the will to invest in implementing the solution.
Is it more
That's
sex
what's been
education
missing.
in schools? Is that one of the ways that you do that? I mean, more education on what can happen?
Well, we know when there's sex education, when there's education around the implications and the consequences, we know that people make different decisions. And we see that in every area. We see that, I learned it in my household growing up. The more my folks educated me on things and I was clear on the consequences and the decisions of my actions, I tended to make different decisions.
All right, we got to take a quick commercial break. We're going to come back with more with Chris Jones, Democratic nominee for governor, right after this.
You're watching Capitol View, Sunday morning talk focused on the political scene in Arkansas.
Before we resume our conversation with Chris Jones, Democratic nominee for Arkansas governor, a programming note. We are scheduling an interview before Election Day with Libertarian Ricky Dale Harrington, also a candidate for governor. And we have extended numerous invitations for Republican Sarah Huckabee Sanders to appear for an interview. As a matter of fact, I have personally extended 28 invitations to her and her campaign over the last 22 months when she first entered this race. I was told there'd be plenty of time for an interview between January 2021 and November 2022. And this week I was told by our press secretary, Jadir, we will be respectfully declining the one-on-one interview. Thanks. So I want our viewers, listeners, and readers to understand we have made the effort to accommodate that interview. So I thank you for being here.
Yes.
More than one time to express your views on things like that. Why do you think that your opponent is not willing to have conversations with people like me, other people in the media, only doing one debate? I think you would have preferred to do more.
Oh, many more. I'd prefer more debates and long debates and really deep getting into what the vision is for the future of Arkansas. I don't know what her reasoning is. I can only speculate that it's either you have no plans, you don't want to answer questions, or you don't care for and respect Arkansans. You know, I had a conversation in Magnolia with a reporter down there, and the conversation was about her lack of desire to go down there and actually have a conversation with them to talk about her issues and her plans and her vision. You know, so look, I worked at Foot Locker growing up. I had to do an interview to get that job. I ran multiple multi-million-dollar organizations. I had to do an interview to get that job. So if you're not willing to show up and answer the tough questions, then what makes us think you would do a good job when you get the job? And the last thing I'll say is that I've traveled the state, hit all 75 counties. What people are yearning for is a governor and leaders who will show up for them and listen to them. And what they're not getting in my opponent is that.
All right, let's talk about jobs and the economy since we're touching on that. It's part of your PB and J plan there. Let's talk about broadband. All of the federal dollars that are kind of parked or coming to Arkansas right now, we got about $1.2 billion that we're estimating will be spent somehow in the state of Arkansas by the next governor and the next legislature. I interviewed the state broadband director several weeks ago, and he thought that there'd be about $600 million that would need to go for some of the finishing out the houses that don't have broadband. And then that would leave another $600 million. And he floated the idea of an affordability trust fund, something that would be state sponsored to help lower those bills. Would you support and be in favor of something like that?
So I haven't had the conversation with him about it, yet I have heard that works in other places. I'm certainly open to supporting and being in favor of that. Why? Because at the end of the day, we need to make sure that we get broadband to every home across the state. And if that's an option to do it, then absolutely 100%. I'm willing to discuss it and consider it.
You've been walking the state, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
Tell me how the conversation of broadband comes up in those rural communities that you're coming out. Do people understand, A, how transformative it could be, and B, what they could do with it? I mean,
yes,
yeah,
they do. So I was in Cove, which is on the other side of Mena.
I've heard this story. You were shooting guns over there.
I was shooting at the turkey shoot. It was
yeah.
so much fun.
Yeah.
And you know, but in addition to talking about the various guns and which one we liked and didn't like, we talked about broadband, and they talked about it. A couple people talked about it from the perspective of veterans services. Being able to access veteran services. You probably know this, but in this country, 22 veterans commit suicide a day, 22 veterans a day. And we have veterans across the state that are not being served. You can serve them better if they have access to the resources. You know, whether it's Cove or Camden or Mena or Harrison, the conversations I'm having are either around education and the educational pathways that open up, economic development, and you take Delta Dirt Distillery. they're able to be in Helena and thriving in Helena because they have access to the broader market because of high-speed internet. And also economic development. You look at businesses. I've talked to multiple folks who are considering Arkansas as a place to relocate their business. And one of their questions is, what's the quality of life? What's the education? And will I have access to high-speed internet? Because if you don't have those, then you can't really thrive as a company.
You say on your website, too, that you want to cut unnecessary regulatory burdens for small business. This is one of your promises for small business support. Is that a catchphrase, or can you cite some specific examples of some things that need to be done?
Yeah, it's not a catchphrase. As you know, I ran the Arkansas Regional Innovation Hub. And one of the things that the Innovation Hub did was really support small businesses and support entrepreneurs. We find that entrepreneurs are, again, going back to high-speed internet, they're not able to get access to the resources that are available because there's so many steps that are necessary to get there. Absolutely, I've spoken with small business owners, and they tell you to get support, you have to fill out 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pieces of paper, and you still barely get the support you need. Those things are unnecessary, and those things don't actually lift up Arkansas. So
is that federal or is that state?
It's both.
Yeah. So as governor, you couldn't do much about the federal.
No, not at all. But we can do something about the state. And so even reducing the burden from the state perspective is far more than and again, I say it's not it sounds like a catchphrase. It's not. Having direct experience to the Innovation Hub and seeing the struggles that some of those entrepreneurs and business owners went through in order to access resources or grow their business is something that I'm certainly concerned about.
When you were making your state agency tour there, I'm assuming you stopped by the Secretary of Commerce or the Department of Commerce there. Yeah. They didn't happen to tell you anything that's in the pipeline that you want to share today, did they?
Well, we had some good conversations about the future of Arkansas.
Okay.
I will tell you this. We did talk about the lithium reserve in South Arkansas. We did talk about this idea that, and this not only applies to Commerce, but some other agencies as well, the idea that we have to begin to get more of a regional perspective and a regional lens on state and the assets of the state and the opportunities that exist.
All right, we got about 60 seconds left here. Is Donald Trump or Joe Biden a factor in this election?
Neither one of them are on the ballot.
Well, I know that, but are they a factor in this election?
Contrary to what my opponent thinks, she seems to think that she's running against Joe Biden, but she's not. She's running to be governor of Arkansas. I think the president and former presidents are always a factor, and they come up in conversations when across the state as I talk to people. But what people they care about more is education, infrastructure, and economic development. Yep. They want to know who's going to make a difference in their lives.
If you don't win this race, will you run again?
If I don't say it?
If you don't win this race this time, will you run again?
Well, look, all of my energy is focused on this race and getting out the vote in this race. I honestly don't know what I'll do next. Here's what I do know, though. My family has been in Arkansas for over 200 years. I am committed to Arkansas and Arkansans. That much I do know.
I'll put you down as a maybe. All right. Chris Jones, Democratic nominee for governor. Thanks for being here. Good luck in the debates next week.
Thanks a lot.
All right. We're back to wrap up right after this.